Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome. So my name is Kristen Wong, and I am the new Director of Inclusive Programs and Services at the American Association of Dental Education, also known as ADEA, and the new Co-Deputy Director of the Summer Health Professions Education Program, SHPEP. So a fun fact, I am also an alum of SHPEP, having participated as a first-year student after the summer after my first year in one of the program's former iterations. So I know their program quite well from the student standpoint. And so I'd like to welcome everyone here to this highly anticipated hashtag Beat That Test webinar, your go-to resource for mastering the art of standardized tests, especially those that are crucial for admission to health professions programs. And so we're delighted to have you join us for this enlightening session, tailored to elevate your test-taking prowess. Scoring well on standardized tests, as you may know, for health profession programs, goes beyond content knowledge. It's about mastering the unique challenges posed by time sections and during the required portions of the test to succeed. And so today we will unravel the secrets of conquering these exams with speed, stamina, and strategic brilliance. Our expert speaker is here to provide you with valuable strategies and insights that extend beyond traditional study methods. And so from time management to stamina building exercises, we'll explore every facet of test preparation to ensure that you not only meet but exceed the expectations of these rigorous exams. And so whether you're a prospective health professions student gearing up for the admissions journey or already navigating the path, this webinar will be your key to acing these critical tests. And so without further ado, I'll allow our guest speaker to introduce himself and then go ahead and start with the session.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction and that lead in, Dr. Wong. My name is Alden Landry. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I practice in Boston. I am also the co-director for the Tour for Diversity in Medicine, which is co-sponsoring this presentation with SHPEP. And fun fact, I, like Dr. Wong, am an alum of the prior iterations of this program. Many moons ago, I did this program at University of Alabama at Birmingham, and I had a phenomenal experience, and it really shaped my growth and helped me to take that next step of going from a pre-med student to a medical student, and now as a practicing physician. So two examples of this program working. So with that, we're going to have this wandering conversation around something that's really important for us, which is how to prepare for these exams. Now, I want you all to know that the Q&A is open. Please feel free to drop your questions in there. I'm going to be trying to look at the questions while giving this presentation and make this as interactive as possible. This presentation is best if we're in a room together and we're able to have a conversation and feed off of each other's energy. But we're going to do the next best thing, which is take advantage of the Q&A. The chat's also open to a degree. I don't know how much you all can chat directly with me, but if you have something and you want to throw it in the chat, you can do that as well. But I am going to keep an eye on the Q&A so we can have this conversation and try and make it as interactive as possible. So we titled this Beat That Test, but I want you all to just take a step back before you think about the MCAT or any other exam. Or any other experience that you're going to have going forward in this process. And that's to quickly tell you what I tell my students that I'm working with is that no one test, no one exam, no one experience, no one evaluation or course defines who you are and is going to tell or shape your career as a physician. Now, that being said, you do need to meet certain metrics, you need to meet certain marks, you do need to pass, but your journey to becoming a physician is an entirety of all of your experiences, and it's not just one experience. And so we want to make sure that we are grounded in an understanding that the MCAT, the DAT, these other standardized tests that you take along the way are one component of the application process to medical school, one very important component to the application process to medical school, but not the only component of that application to medical school. So I thought I was going to be alone in giving this presentation, but I was fortunate to get a colleague to come and join me. So Dr. Henry, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself so we can jump into the presentation?
Yes, sir. Good to see you again, my man.
Yes.
Hey, everybody. My name is Dr. Brandon Henry. I am the Assistant Director for the Tour for Diversity in Medicine. I am a sports medicine physician, Chief Athletics Medical Officer at California Baptist University, and team physician for our USA Men's Olympic water polo team.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump right into it now that Dr. Henry's here and just talk about the MCAT and what you might expect to see on the MCAT or the DAT. And this is a quick snapshot of the courses that you're probably going to take, or some of the skills that you need to make sure that you have mastered before you go and start to really dive into preparing for taking the MCAT. I think it's really important for students to think about when they're ready for the exam, and we're going to talk about that through and through during this presentation. But just to give you a synopsis of what these exams cover, there's been some change over time as to what's in some exam versus what's in others. And they're pretty standardized across both, with physics being something that you see on the MCAT, but not necessarily something you see on the DAT. Psychology and sociology, I recall when this was integrated into the MCAT a few years ago. It's not necessarily something that you're going to see during the in the DAT. And then one good thing for you all as students is the writing section and the verbal ability of these exams are not necessarily present in the way that they were in past exams. But this is just a quick snapshot of some of the concepts that you need to have mastered and under your belt so that you can move forward when you're taking your exam. I think one thing that's really important is these are courses that you have already started taking as a freshman in college or a sophomore in college as you enter into your pre-health studies. And so you started studying for the MCAT already. You've already started preparing for the MCAT already. Now it's time to really kick it into gear and make sure that you're doing the things that you need to do so you're fully ready to take the exam. And I keep stressing that you're ready to take the exam. And so I want to make sure we make a pause here and have this discussion of when do you know that you're ready for the exam versus when should you take the exam? Because they're two different questions. Now, you do need to take the MCAT before you apply to medical school. And there is a certain amount of time that an MCAT score is going to be good for before you apply to medical school. But just because you are a third year undergraduate student, you're a junior in college, and you are you've taken your biochemistry course and you've taken physics and you're in some of your advanced biology courses, doesn't mean that you're actually ready to take the exam. Now, most people feel pressured because in a traditional approach to applying to medical school, in traditional meaning that you apply to medical school during your third and fourth year of medical of undergrad so that you can be ready to start medical school right after you graduate from college. That's the traditional approach. But the reality is most people aren't ready to take the exam at that time. And so therefore they get put into this category called non-traditional pathways or non-traditional students. And I just want to make the point that being a non-traditional student is not a bad thing. Being a student who decides that they're going to take a gap year or a gap season before applying to medical school or dental school is actually becoming more and more commonplace, with the average age of people starting medical school being around the age of 25. So that means that people, if they're graduating from college in a 4-year time frame, are graduating around 22 or 23, and then taking some time off before going forward and applying and taking the MCAT and applying to medical school. So when you are thinking about, are you ready to apply for the MCAT, are you ready to take the MCAT? You need to think about, how prepared am I? What score am I shooting for? How have I done on my practice exams? Where do I think I'm going to be as with my prior my prior courses that I've taken? Have I gotten all the things that I've needed done in order to be ready for this exam? So what should you do to make sure that you're ready for studying for and preparing for the MCAT? Well, I think for us, the most important thing is to actually have a plan. And so what we do with the Tour for Diversity in Medicine is we actually give this sort of 6-month script of how students should approach the MCAT, how they should approach the DAT. Now, some people may need a longer period, or some people may feel that they don't need the entire 6 months to prepare for the MCAT. This is very much a generalized recommendation on how we suggest attacking this exam. But I think you need to make sure that you tailor it for yourself and your needs and what else is going on in your life. So, have you completed all the necessary courses? Going back to that first slide, have you taken a psychology or sociology course in addition to taking those biology, chemistry, physics, and math courses that are expected of you for the MCAT? Have you taken all of those courses? And I think there's a difference, and we're going to talk about this later. There's a difference between actually taking and studying for a course that you're taking as an undergrad versus studying for the MCAT, because the way that you learn those information and the way that you're going to use that information are going to be very different. Taking an exam at a college level versus using that information and applying it for the MCAT are very different. So have you taken the right courses? Have you done practice tests, and have you started to review that information? Have you recognized what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? For some people, reading speed is a weakness. And so there are tools and techniques that you could use to make sure that you're able to read quicker, process information quicker. It's not that you don't have a knowledge or an understanding of the biology or the sociology or the chemistry or the math problems that you're being asked, but you have trouble getting through the question stems that you're going to be reading or processing that information. And so do you have the necessary skills in order to perform well on this exam? So we know what our strengths are. We're often easily do a great job of identifying our strengths. But have you thought about your weaknesses? What are your other knowledge gap areas? What are areas where you often slip up? What are areas that you skip over? What are areas that you need to shore up before you take the exam? Having an understanding of your strengths and your weaknesses are going to be really important to make sure you're prepared for the exam. The other thing people don't realize, and I'll share this later as we talk about our personal stories, is that preparing for the MCAT and actually taking the MCAT or the DAT, these tests are marathons. And the common adage is you don't get out and run 26 miles without actually having trained for it. And much like you don't get out and train for, you need to train for running an actual marathon by starting off slowly and running a couple miles and each day and getting better and better over the course of over a course of a certain amount of time before you can run a fully marathon. You need to make sure that you are preparing so that you can sit down, think at a high level, function at a critical level, make sure that you're prepared to take an exam that's going to last a number of hours. So do you have a routine? Do you have support networks around you? Do you have the study materials available for you? Have you figured out how you're going to negotiate any family responsibilities or work responsibilities or even school responsibilities while you're preparing for this exam? Remember, you have to treat the MCAT as if it is its own entity in itself and not like you're just adding this on in addition to your regular academic studies that you're going to be doing. Now, you started out 6 months in advance and you started preparing for the MCAT, but as you get to those 3 months before the exam, the 90 days right before the exam, you really need to buckle down and make sure that you're going to be ready for the exam. So in addition to making sure that you've scheduled the exam, which is a huge hurdle that a lot of students come up with because they're worried about taking the exam at a certain location, or they're worried about just getting the schedule according to whatever else may be happening in their life events. They need to know where they are at when it comes to preparing for the exam. So what we encourage people to do is really engage with the AAMC content that's available out there and see what you have been, what resources that you need in order to make sure that you're augmenting your study as best as possible. At the Tour for Diversity in Medicine, we do not speak specifically to any test prepping materials that you can use. There's tons of examples that are out there. You have to go and make a consumer's choice as to which is going to be the best material for you. A lot of this information is free and available through some other online resources. And at one point in time, the AAMC had a great relationship with the Khan Academy, where about 90% of the content was available. But there are other resources that are out there, whether it be through your institution or through some self-funded opportunities that you can make sure that you have available and resources available for you. again, during this 90 days, you need to make sure that you're making that transition from knowledge attainment to knowledge adaptation, and making sure that you're able to take the content that you have in your brain and be able to use it and apply this information in order to take and answer a question appropriately. And so we're really going to talk a little bit more about how important it is to really engage with content and questions in order to make sure you're best prepared for the exam. And the last thing I want to say, which is really important on this slide, is that the AAMC has 6 full-length exams that are available, and so, they are free. 2 of them are free, and so you can take advantage of this resource, and you can take these exams over and over again. Again, you don't get out and run into a marathon without actually sitting down without actually training for the marathon appropriately. So much like you would with training for a marathon, train for the MCAT and take those practice exams. Now, as you start to get closer to the exam, remember, we went from a 6 months out to 3 months out or 90 days out. Now you're about 30 days out. This is really where you need to be augmenting your knowledge, and you're reviewing and not trying to learn and process new things. You need to make sure that all of that knowledge that you gained over the past 4 to 5 months that you've been working towards when applying studying for the MCAT, you're really in content review and you're focusing on your weak areas. There are certain things that you do need to memorize, and there are certain things that honestly you're going to be good for that MCAT, and then you're probably not going to need for a few years until you're back in medical school and you're going to need to regain that information. But make sure that you have those things that you know you will need to memorize: certain equations, certain formulas, certain chemistry molecules. Make sure you have those things memorized, but other things, make sure you have those concepts locked into place. I'll tell you, for me, one thing that really helped me to be successful as I was getting into this 30-day period was that I took the MCAT when the MCAT was offered on Saturdays, Saturdays only. And I was participating in a review course. And for the 3 Saturdays before the review course, we took a full-length exam. So that meant every Saturday morning we would get up. By 8:30, we were sitting down in front of a computer or a Scantron, and we were taking a full-length exam. What that meant for us was that by the time we actually got to the day of the MCAT, we were used to sitting down for that extended amount of time, and we were ready to take a full-length exam. So make sure you are practicing, not just reviewing your content and reviewing your questions and making sure that you've memorized those key important formulas and equations, but you've also sat down and actually taken a full-length exam. So you know what it's going to feel like. You know when you're going to get tired. You know when you need to take a bio break. You know when you're going to need to eat a snack. You know when you're going to need to get up and stretch, which you can do between those sessions in order to make sure that you have the energy and the fortitude and actually to move through and complete the exam. Well, hopefully forgive me, we're having a little bit of a tech issue. There we go. Dr. Henry, did you want to take over here, or did you want me to go a little bit further?
If you can go, let's see, what is this? If you can go just a little bit further.
Okay. So there's types of MCAT questions that you need to be aware of. For all of you to understand, there's going to be types of questions that are passage-based, which means you're going to have to read a number of paragraphs and then be able to process that information and then answer questions based off of what you read. There's going to be types of questions where you're given a bit of information and you have to take it from that bit of information in order to answer questions, meaning there's inference-based questions. And then lastly, there's going to be questions that are purely based on knowledge, things that you should know. So remember, there are certain things that you need to memorize, certain concepts that you need to understand, and then certain concepts that you need to be able to access when needed. And that's what all 3 of these components of the MCAT and the DAT are going to be asking for. Now, there are different approaches to taking the practice exam, but we're going to share with you a few things that were really important for us. I think it's important that you don't just think that the only time you're going to be looking at these questions is when you're taking a practice exam. And for many students, doing a handful of questions a day, whether it be 25 or 50 questions, are going to be important. So for each person, do a subset of questions as part of your study routine every day leading up to your last few days of preparing for the MCAT. When you take these questions, it's important for you to not only look at the questions, look at the answers, and be happy that you got a question right, but to look also at the wrong answers and get a better understanding as to why you got those questions wrong, or why that why that answer stem is wrong, because that answer stem may actually lead to you having a better understanding of the content that you're learning. Again, take a full-length exam. We cannot stress this enough. Understand what it's like to actually sit down in a quiet spot, an unfamiliar spot, and take a full-length exam. Now, taking a practice MCAT while you're sitting down with your TV streaming a Netflix movie, and you have your friends in the background, and you're going through and you're doing questions with your legs up on your couch or on your table, with your laptop in your lap, that is not actually taking a full-length practice exam. You need to go to a library, you need to go to a coffee shop, you need to go to a place where you can feel as if you are in an artificial environment, which it feels like when you're taking your exam. Know that you have to focus, and then you have to plan out all those things that we were just talking about. When's your bio break? When are you going to get your snack? When are you going to eat your lunch? How do you want to use that downtime that you have in between sections? Or do you need to breeze through and know that I'm going to take 2 sections right off the bat, and then my third section is when I take my break? When you take your practice exams, this is how you pick up on these skills. So with that, now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Henry.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Can everybody hear me? You hear me? All right. So I want to real quick say that simulation part that Dr. Landry was talking about is super, super, super important. And I remember a lot of people telling me that, and I kind of did the kind of normal pre-med thing, which is like, okay, like sure, I hear you. And like Dr. Landry was saying, okay, I'm gonna take a full length exam, and I've got my feet up, I've got, like you said, my music on in the background, I've got all these different things going on, and it feels like it's the right thing to do, because for me, I felt like I was telling myself, well, I'm taking the full length. And then when I would actually simulate or actually take like a real practice exam, I kind of recognized that the endurance that I needed was not there. And I remember the first time I took the MCAT, I took my MCAT 3 times. And the first time I took it, yeah, I was tired. You can feel yourself fading out during sections. And so I kind of want to continue to harp on that point of simulate these exams, right? Simulate the environment, because it's different to be in a complete room of silence, and it's just you and your thoughts, and you're trying to go through all these different things in your mind while trying to look at the clock, while trying to look at the question, while trying to feed through. So practice these different things. Okay. So one thing I think you can really do, and I had to do this for myself, which is really figure out, how do you study? And it's something that's very important to do. A lot of times we want to study just for exams. Um, again, studying just for the MCAT, studying just for the DAT. One thing we'll talk about a little bit in the presentation is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And one thing you have to recognize, that when you're studying for these exams, like Dr. Landry said early on, when you're taking these classes, you're already studying for these exams, right? So when you find yourself trying to tailor your study, recognize, one, that you've already started studying for these exams, but that the more you know this content, the more you are better prepared for these exams, because you know the content well. You have a good base. You've got a good foundation for yourself. Okay. So, it's good to recognize, yes, some things are going to be strictly just for the exam, but for the most part, when you're talking about all this different content that you have to know, it's going to be used in different parts of either just your classes or your exam. So think about how you study, right? Understanding that, or kind of think about, how do you approach different types of exams? Questions, I'm sorry. Some questions are very much, it's just boom, what is this? And then there's your choices, right? Understanding that, okay, yeah, I can go through and eliminate certain answers because I know this is wrong, boom, there's my answer, right? Um, some of the other ones you're gonna have to take a different approach, right? Where you're gonna have to go through maybe the paragraph, and then be able to, maybe just, am I going to be the one that reads just the actual question, right? First, and then I go back through my stem, or am I going to be the one that's going to go and take my very first line and then go to the question part and then look to see if I can answer, right? All of these different types of methods to answering questions are out there. And when you take review courses, people will tell you, you should do this first, then do this, or you should do this first and then do that. You really have to kind of take a step back and say, okay, what works best for me? I learned that for me, I knew that I could read that last part. If I read that last question part, it would give me something to focus on when I'm reading everything else. So once I read this, then I can look here. And if what I was reading in here had nothing to do with what the actual question was, then I knew that I could get rid of certain things. You know what I mean? So it's very important, again, just to recognize how you work, how you process things. And again, learning how to approach certain questions will then allow you to decide which stuff do I want to focus on. Um, the more that you do questions, and I'm a big fan of questions, doing tons of questions, because my thoughts are, and I come from an athletic mindset, says, well, if I've done my scouting report, right, and I know what that team is going to present to me, there's going to be very few ways that you can actually beat me. And I feel like these exams are very similar, right? The more questions you do, the more that you'll be prepared for whatever they may throw out to you, because you may have seen something exactly the same, you may have seen something super similar, whatever, whatnot. So again, be prepared by doing multiple things like that. Okay. I don't want to keep harping on that, but Dr. Landry already talked about endurance. Time is a very big factor. Um, and sometimes it's best to actually set an alarm on your phone when you're doing questions, even if you tell yourself, I'm going to do 15 questions. Maybe for those 15 questions, maybe you give yourself 17 minutes to do those 15 questions, right? You set an alarm and you'll kind of see how it kind of feels to know that there's a timer sitting right here, right in front of you, and you have to get through these 15 questions. Okay, so practice doing that so you can get used to the shock of seeing that clock ticking down while it's right there in front of your face. Next slide. Again, three big things for you to kind of focus on, right? Maybe put these, I like to see things big and bold, right? Just like how this slide is right here. Maybe when you're in the middle of your studying, you kind of categorize all these different things out. Okay, today I'm going to focus on my content, right? So I want to make sure that I'm studying all the basic things that I may need for the OChem section or the bio section or whatever, whatnot, right? Then maybe you have another day where you're like, okay, today I'm going to work on the speed part of things, right? Like I said, you do your timing, right? Where you have your questions. Maybe you start off with only 10 questions at 11 minutes, right? Then maybe you bump that up and you go, okay, I'm going to do 15 questions in 17 minutes, right? And that helps you to work on your speed, but you're also getting content in, right? Because you're actually doing questions and you're learning from those questions, right? The other part of that is uh is I'm sorry, is the endurance part, right? So um I think that so sorry, everything that I'm saying, sorry, I'm kind of, I want to make sure I'm giving you guys exactly what's needed. Um so what do most people prep for, right? And I think that's what we're asking you guys, like what do you guys most prep for? Correct, Dr. Landry? I want to make sure that I'm saying that part correctly.
Yeah, I think where you were going was exactly right. Most you were going through about the importance of content, speed, and endurance, but the reality is most medical students, most pre-med students, they focus on the content.
Right,
Uh, and I think that's oftentimes the limitations of a lot of people's preparation.
right.
Because you can have that knowledge locked down, you can learn it, but you need to be able to quickly access it, and you need to be able
Absolutely.
to access it for a long period of time.
Right, right. Um, yes. Again, very well said. So, um, but like we said, right, the MCAT and the DAT are very different exams. And it's one of those where everybody can tell you, and you may not understand it until you actually get into the exam, and you actually start that first section. So again, right, stop worrying about like, ooh, study, right? Like again, we want you to study, but it's more of a preparing, right? It's not something that you can just say, oh, I'm studying just for this exam. This is what we talked about for the whole preparation part. Preparation and training, right? Training, and again, look at it from an athletic mindset, right? Is that uh, when season's coming up, you're not just studying just for one team that you may be playing, right? You're training for the actual season, right? You are beginning going for the entirety of what is about to happen, right? And so, again, these exams, when I took it, it was 8 hours long. And so, again, you have to train yourself to be able to think for that long of a period of time, right? You have to be able to train yourself to be able to say, hey, this question really threw me off, and I don't feel too good about the last 5 questions that I did. But you know what? Hey, the marathon continues. Let me continue to keep running this race. Okay, so train yourself, right? Just like you see that treadmill right there. You've got to work your brain as much as you can so that you are prepared for all of the different or whatever scenarios may come during that given exam. Okay.
So I'm going to take over here. And I think one of the things that happens to a lot of us when we're preparing for an exam like this is we become anxious, we get fearful, our imposter syndrome starts to creep in. And there's ways that you can start to manage that. So, there's different techniques, whether it be visualization techniques, counting down, breathing and relaxation techniques. And I think it's really important for all of us to have access to these additional mental cues, these mindset changes to help us to be better prepared for the exam that we're about to take. We stress the importance of, and I love the way that Dr. Henry is presenting it, this athletic mindset that you're training, that you're going to be preparing, that you're thinking about this as a season, not just one game. When you are thinking about this, you have to practice, practice, practice. You have to be consistent. You have to make it so that this becomes part of your memory, part of your approach, part of your plan of attack for preparing for this MCAT. Remember, we titled this "Beat That Test," right? There's a reason why we're saying beat that test. It goes into that mentality of there's a competition that's going to be in place, but part of every competition comes in to play with practice. Visualize the results that you want to have. Make sure that you're mentally prepared for it. Make sure that you know how to recover if you have a bad section and you feel like you underperformed on a section, so you can have that break, that mental reset, that restructuring, that you can go into that Zen moment and then come out like Kobe, and then you're going to shoot your shot, and you're going to make sure that you're prepared. Have that mental mindset, that mental fortitude that you're going to need to get through this exam. Now, this implies that you need to have the right mindset in approaching this exam. And so part of this is going from a fixed to a growth mindset. Now, some of you have heard these terminologies, some of you haven't, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And growth mindset implies that you can see a challenge, you can see an opportunity, you recognize that you have weaknesses, and you're going to put together a plan of action so that you can grow from that experience, so that you can think about how can I get better? Whereas a fixed mindset is the exact opposite of that, where you assume that something is the way it is, it's never going to change, there's nothing that you can do about it, and it's almost very fatalistic approach. You assume that other people are going to be better than you because that's just who they are or what they've come from. You're scared of putting yourself out there. You don't challenge yourself, and you give up easily. If this is going to be your approach to the MCAT, if this is going to be your approach to your academics, then I can guarantee you that you will struggle mightily in medicine. However, if you come at this with a growth mindset, thinking, wow, those other people are incredibly smart, let me be inspired by them. Let me think about how I can train to grow and be like them. Let me ask them, how did you get so good at this? You will be in a better position so that you can be prepared for the MCAT. So, fixed mindset. Again, things aren't going to change. You've given up before you've actually taken the exam. You think it's more important to look smart than actually be smart. You aren't really engaged in activities that help you to grow. You don't study, you don't put forth the effort, and you stay within your comfort zone, right? You're fixed, you're in a box, you don't move. That's the mentality that we need to avoid. We need to be proactive. We need to be in that growth mindset. We need to, excuse me, understand that with time and effort, we can get better. And the goal is to making sure that we are taking priority on our education and we're learning strategies to get better. We're engaging in activities to improve our intellect, and we're engaging activities that are going to challenge us and push us beyond our comfort zone. Go ahead, Dr. Henry.
And one thing I wanted to add to that too, right, is so there's a couple things on here that I know that I used to really struggle with. That looking smart is not the focus. And I think a lot of times when we are pre-med, pre-dent, pre-farm, whatever it may be, right, we're in these classes, and like Dr. Landry said, you may see somebody that you believe is smarter than you and whatever, whatnot. So then sometimes we try to play this role of, well, let me look smart, right? Let me look like I'm doing everything exactly. And I think once you kind of get past that, you start to kind of recognize, like, it's not about looking smart, right? If I'm doing everything that I need to do, and again, I'm challenging myself to be better, I'm making the necessary adjustments, then I'm going to be smart. So it doesn't matter how I may look outwardly, right? Because I'm doing all the work, and I have this growth mindset that says regardless of whatever challenge may come my way, I'm going to be perfectly fine, right? So again, I want to push on just that not looking smart part, because again, I know that's something that I definitely was challenged with. I think the other part of a growth mindset, the way that I used to, like, if you did 10 questions, right? And if you only got 3 questions right, right? The way I look at that, right? One, being a big baseball fan, and me and Dr. Landry talk baseball fairly often, right? But as a baseball fan, right? A hitter that gets 3 hits out of every 10 at bats, out of every 10 at bats is going to the Hall of Fame, right? So, okay. So yes, hey, 3 out of 10 sometimes is really good. But if I missed 7 things, that means now that I get the chance to learn 7 new things, right? I've got 7 opportunities here to be that much better than I was that first time that I took those 10 questions, right? Like, that's that growth mindset that says, hey, okay, fine, I missed 7, but I learned something new here. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out as a part of it.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. So we got 2 questions that came in, one through the chat and one through the Q&A. And it was a question about people with dyslexia or other learning disabilities, and what resources are available. And I think it's important for you all to make sure that to know that if you have a learning disability, if it has been documented, if it is something that you've received accommodations for through your undergraduate institution, then you can also receive accommodations through the MCAT and allow for additional time or additional resources that you need in order to be prepared and have the adequate amount of time so you can do well on the exam. I don't know all the details as part of this presentation. We're not going to go through that. But there are resources that are available for you. I think number one, it is important that you have it documented that you have a learning disability. Number two, that you have approached your college or your university that you have this learning disability, so that they can put forth in place any resources that you need at the collegiate level, at the undergraduate level. And then 3, you take that same information and you bring this to the AAMC for any accommodations that may be available for you. So make sure that you are taking, you are doing the things necessary. Now, you can't just say on the day of the exam, hey, I have a learning disability, what resources are available for me? This requires time. This requires some upfront thought and effort on your end to make sure that you have the accommodations that are needed for this and any other exam that you're going to be going through going forward with taking standardized tests. I want to quickly try and jump into this discussion because Dr. Henry gave the great baseball analogy around hitting when it comes to the growth mindset. And really, the way you change this is by thinking this into existence. You have to practice a growth mindset. So I don't understand this yet. This is a difficult problem for me, but I will work on it. I need to get better, so I'm going to meet with my professor or my tutor to see if I can better understand. I don't know this right answer, but I'm going to challenge myself and go out of my comfort zone and raise my hand anyway. I didn't get that last point. I'm going to ask my classmate to go over this content for me. I'm going to go and get help from a professor. I'm going to meet with my tutor to make sure I can get this information and have it clarified in my head. For all of you, practice your growth mindset. This is something I do with my kids. This is something I do with the medical students that I advise. This is something I do with the pre-health students that I advise. Practice a growth mindset. Snap out of that negative, snap out of that comfort zone, be willing to challenge yourself, be willing to look for help and seek support in order for you to be successful. Because really, what it comes down to is you have to believe in yourself. You have to recognize that you are capable of this. You are smart enough. You can learn from others. You can grow. You can be better as long as you make that transition from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. But I want to maybe take a pause here and actually share some stories, because I think we can give you all of this discussion around what to do, how to prepare for the exam, and making this mentality change from a growth mindset, from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. But what's really important is for you to hear some of our struggles when it came to the MCAT. And so I'll start off with one story, then I'll pass it to Dr. Henry, and then I have a second story that I'm going to share after that. So the first time I took the MCAT, and I'm telling you the first time because I had to take the exam multiple times. So the first time I took the MCAT, I was in that mindset where I had just taken physics, I had just taken calculus 2, and I was finishing up biochemistry. I had already taken organic chemistry and general chemistry. I was a biology major. I thought I was ready for the exam. Plus, many moons ago, I had taken a practice exam and I did okay on it. And I said, oh, if I've done okay on my practice exam and I've taken all these courses, what other studying do I really need to do? So I went and I said, I'm going to be able to take this exam and I really don't need to prepare much for it. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was I went to the exam and I really didn't have any clue where the exam was going to be. I knew it was going to be offered in downtown Houston, which is about an hour away from where my college was. And so I said, oh, I'll get there, leave about an hour and a half before, get down there, and I'll be ready to take the exam. That was my second mistake. My third mistake was I had no clue what I was going to do to eat or drink during my breaks or do for lunch. And then the fourth mistake was there was a big party that night and all my friends were going to it. And I said, as soon as I'm done with the MCAT, I'm going to go out and have fun at this party. Well, let me tell you how the actual day went when I took the exam. I drove to the site where I was going to be taking the exam. I got lost and I didn't know where to park. I ultimately found a place to park and I made it to the testing center just before the exam was going to start. So completely frazzled and I sat down and I started taking the exam. First block went fine. The second block, not so much. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to push through. By that third block, my mind was toast. I hadn't even gotten through halfway through the exam, and I was mentally burnt out, and I was starting to get physically uncomfortable. I was sitting in that chair, and I started to squirm, and I was trying to stretch my back. I was not prepared to sit down for this exam and take it over the course of the 6 or so hours that I was going to be there. And then when it came time for lunch, everybody got up and they had their little lunch bags all ready and they had their sandwiches and their protein bars or whatever they were eating at that time. And I went down and guess what? There was no food open anywhere near where I was going to be taking the exam. So I had to end up going to a vending machine, getting a couple bags of candy and a soda to try and eat. That was the only food I could get. And then I had to go back and take another half of the exam. By the time I finished the exam, I felt like I had just got beaten up. I felt like I was in a fight with Mike Tyson and he just whooped my butt. I was tired. I had a headache. I didn't even know if I wanted to go to medical school after that. I tell you what, I certainly didn't want to go to that party that I was planning to go to after So that was my big mistake with taking the MCAT. And I learned from my first failure in approaching the MCAT. Dr. Henry, why don't you tell us one of your stories?
Man, listen, it's these exams are brutal, and but and it's crazy because you go into it thinking, like you said, okay, I'm gonna be fine, right? So I took the MCAT 3 times, and so when Dr. Landry and I took it, it was out of 45. And so my first time, again, I had finished, and so I'm going to address one of these questions inside my story. So I um I thought I was fine. Like, I had taken all the classes, I had done fairly well. I even somehow signed up for a Princeton review course. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be good, right? Like, I'm going to be I'm gonna be all right. I didn't prepare the way I should have, right? I thought I was taking practice exams when I wasn't really. I was just kind of just there and just doing questions. So I thought I was gonna be fine. That first time I took the MCAT, I I got a 15. And that's out of 45, right? So every section, there was 3 sections. Every section was out of 15. I got a 7 in physical sciences, I got a 6 in biological sciences, and I got a 2 in verbal reasoning. 2 out of 15, right? And then so I had to take a step back, like I thought I could read, right? When I took my first exam, I was 24 years old. And I'm like, there's no way that I got a 2 on the section to where what you're supposed to do is read a paragraph and answer questions based on that. And it made me feel like I was the dumbest thing in the entire world, right? So then I said, okay, well, hey, growth mindset, I'm fine. I'm gonna do it again because I'm not gonna allow this thing to beat me, right? I'm going to beat this. So what did I do? I signed because I was rushing so I could apply, so I could hurry up and get into medical school, right? So what did I do? I applied to take it again 6 months later. Did I change anything? Not at all. Did I make any adjustments to any way that I had studied? Nope, not at all. I did everything pretty much exactly the same. And what happened? I got a 17 on the next exam, right? I got an 8 in physical sciences. I got a 7 in biological sciences, and you can guess what I got to get on verbal, a 2 again. Now at this point, now I'm approaching 25 years old and I still feel like I can't read because I got a 2 out of 15 on this exam or on that section. What I had to do was what we talked about in the growth mindset, which is challenging yourself, right? Step outside of your comfort zone, take a real hard look at where you are and figure out what you're not doing right and fix that. So the question in there talks about like what do you do when you are at a plateau with your score, right? I was at a plateau, but what I had to figure out was that I know where my weakness is. So let me address my weakness. So I knew that verbal reasoning was not something I was good at. The reason was because growing up in life, I didn't have to read books. I was never forced to read books. In high school, I was an athlete. I didn't have to do that. So I had never read a full book until I was 25 years old. So, but that's why I struggled on this exam because you had to have great reading comprehension to read these 3 paragraphs and answer questions based on that. So what did I do? I went and started reading things like the Wall Street Journal, right? Just reading random articles in there. I started reading The Economist, right? I started reading all of these super dense, difficult um, magazines, and I would read articles at a time just to challenge myself, right? To stretch my mind, to train my brain to be able to read this. And then I would try to answer my own questions based on what I read, just to make sure that I actually understood what was being told to me. I did that. And then I did 3 to 5 verbal reasoning passages every single day in order just to work on that because I was so weak on that. And by the third time that I took my exam, I had raised that score about 5 points. And just raising that score alone put me in a position to gain, at least to get an interview. And ultimately, I ended up getting into that medical school. So I say all that just to say, yes, the exam is tough, but when you feel like you're stuck, when you feel like your score is not moving at all, take a step back, right? Take a deep breath and really take a hard look in the mirror and say, okay, where am I struggling? Like, where have I plateaued? And why have I plateaued, right? Am I not approaching the questions correctly? Right? Am I getting too tired? Am I plateauing at the end of the section because I'm fatiguing out? Um, am I just working on just content only? Right? Like some of the things that we talked about all in this beat the test, take a look at every single one of those and say, okay, where do I need to change? And how can I be better at every single one of these so that I can beat this exam?
Thank you, Dr. Henry. It's so interesting because I've heard you tell your story when it comes to the MCAT. Um, and I feel like I learn a little bit more about you and about your experience each time
Yeah,
I hear you. We've been doing this for almost 10 years now, so over 10 years now,
yeah,
just hearing
yep,
each other's stories. So I want to go back and I mentioned the first time, and Dr. Henry mentioned what he did for his exams and how he made sure he did better. I want to share with you what actually worked for me, because I think there's a lot of great questions about, oh, what resource did you use, or how did you approach this, or how did you do that? Um, so I eventually decided that, after I took that MCAT the first time, that I was not prepared for the exam. It wasn't that I couldn't do better. It's that I recognized when I took the exam the first time, I just did not prepare. And so going back to that growth mindset, I said, what do I need to do different? And so one of the first things I did was got one of those really, really thick MCAT review books. It was probably 600 pages long. And I said, I'm going to read from each of the sections, biology, and then the physical sciences, and then I'm going to read from the verbal reasoning. And I'm going to take one chapter, and I'm going to go through it each day. And I sat down, came up with a plan. I wrote it down, and I held myself accountable. And I made sure to get through that entire book. As I mentioned, I recognized that I struggled with some of the questions, in so much that I could, like Dr. Henry, read a passage, but then while I was reading the passage, would sometimes get lost in the passage and not be able to answer the questions because I was going back to the passage and trying to gain information without recognizing that I had already read that information. And oftentimes for some of those passages, I didn't even need to read the passage to be able to answer some of the questions. And so that goes into the technique side of things. And I started to look at some of the questions that I felt comfortable answering without the passages. And I started to look at how I approached the exam differently. And so when I actually took the MCAT the second time, I would read the questions first and then go back and read the passage. So I knew what information I should be looking for so I can answer those questions appropriately. And then the third thing that I did, which was really important, and I mentioned this during our presentation earlier, is I took a full-length practice MCAT every Saturday before I took the MCAT. And that changed how I was prepared for that MCAT. I knew when I was going to burn out. I knew when I needed to stop and eat. I knew when I was going to need to get up and go to the bathroom. I knew how much at that point I wasn't drinking coffee. Life has changed now, but now I drink coffee. But at that time, I wasn't drinking coffee. But how much water or soda I should be drinking while taking the exam so that I could be comfortable while taking the exam. All of these things mattered, and all of these things came out by taking those practice exams. Not only did it give me confidence in being able to sit down and take that exam for 7 hours, but it also just helped me to be comfortable in that space. And so by the time I actually took the MCAT the next time, I didn't feel as if I had gotten beaten up. I didn't feel as if I was underprepared. I didn't feel as if I was mentally fatigued and had a headache. And then also, the other thing I mentioned in that story is when I took the MCAT, I knew where I was taking the MCAT, and I knew what food was going to be available, so that when I did take my lunch break, I knew I was going to be able to get something to eat, and I was going to be comfortable throughout the entire exam. So we say all this to say, when you take these exams and you're preparing for the MCAT, it's not just about that content that most medical students focus on. It is about making sure that you have the knowledge that you need, the memorized components, which is a small component of it, but you've also making sure that you have the endurance to take these exams, and you've put yourself in the right position so that you can be successful. So we are coming up towards the end of time. I want to say thank you to our hosts and our partners with SHPEP, both the AAMC and ADIA, for working with us. If you have more information that you would like to get from us, you can reach out to us at the Tour for Diversity. We're on X, no longer Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and we have videos that are available. And you can reach out to us on social media as well. So thank you all for joining us. We're going to sit through and leave it open for the next 2 or 3 minutes and answer any questions that may be coming up in the Q&A. We've already answered a handful of those questions in the Q&A, but thank you again for joining us. Dr. Henry, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Hey, again, it's just a test at the end of the day, right? And I know we've talked big and bad about it. And yes, a lot of us have stories from being beaten up from it. But at the end of the day, the one thing that Dr. Landry and Dr. Matthews and everybody has always said to students, even to myself, right? When I still take exams, these are just exams. And you will beat this exam just the same way you've beaten any other exam. But don't be afraid to dive fully in and to step outside your comfort zone and give it everything you got. And when you do that, you'll feel good about whatever happens at the end of that day. Should we? There's a question up here, Dr. Landry, that's talking about extracurriculars. I know we didn't really talk about it's more. This is more about the exam part. Can I just say
Yeah,
just
go
real
ahead,
quick?
go ahead. You can jump into it.
Yeah, yeah. So really, when it comes to extracurriculars to be competitive for medical school, the one thing you don't want to do is don't find yourself just trying to check a box just to check a box. If there are extracurriculars that you love and enjoy, do those, be good at those, and then learn how to explain to medical schools why doing that was so important to you. And you show your passion about that and how that relates to the passion that you want to give to medicine. And that's perfectly fine, right? Like, yes, people do the shadowing, people do all that's fine. But like one of the extracurriculars that I did was coaching kids different sports. I'm a sports medicine doctor now, and it kind of worked out. But at the same time, that was what I enjoyed doing, and I could talk about why that was important to me in medicine. So don't try to check a box. Do what you enjoy.
And there was a quick question that came in. What if I fail the MCAT more than once? Will med schools see that? There are a certain amount of times that you can take the MCAT. I just want to reframe the way we say this. You don't fail the MCAT. You get a
Fail.
score on the MCAT. There's not a fail that you get.
Right.
There are scores that you want to shoot for, or score ranges that you want to shoot for. If you can show that you have improved on the MCAT, and yes, you may have scored poorly, which you consider poorly, the exam when you took it the first or second time. But even in Dr. Henry's story, he took the exam, and by the third time, he got to a point where he got a score that was competitive enough to get accepted into medical school. But that doesn't discount all the other things that Dr. Henry had done in order to prepare himself, whether it be those extracurriculars, whether it be going back and taking additional coursework at the graduate level, whether it be making sure that he was showing leadership within organizations. All of these things are also other components that medical schools should be doing as part of holistic review, which I think we're going to be talking about at 4 o'clock anyways. We're going to talk about holistic review. So there's going to be more to this conversation to come.
And oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
real quick. And then with that, there was another question that was about if you fail a class. Hey, if you fail a class, you fail a class. Get back to it, either retake it or, what I'm saying, make sure you address it in the post back, doing something afterwards, right? Failing classes happen. It's okay. Work through it, beat it, and then move on past it.
Yep. And Tony just put into the chat, you could take your MCAT up to 7 times. So I don't advise that you take it 7 times.
No.
You do the right things, listen to some of the advice we gave you in this exam, you're going to be fine.
Right.
And you can, your goal is to make sure that you are prepared for this exam so that you only have to do it once, and you all can learn from the mistakes that Dr. Henry and I made. Again, thank you to the SHPEP for hosting us, and feel free to reach out to us, and y'all have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.